He's a good boy.
Pigott was abruptly fired last month from the Treasury Department's Bureau of Fiscal Service, based here in Parkersburg, West Virginia. The reason given for the firings of 125 probationary employees at the Bureau? Poor performance.
I had my last review on the 31st of January, and I had the highest rating that you can get on a review, less than 21 days before I was terminated for my performance.
You voted for Donald Trump.
I did.
Do you regret that vote?
Yes, I do. To cut the knees out of the working class Americans just doesn't make sense to me. I expected more from President Donald Trump.
Since speaking out, Pigott says she's received death threats and her home has been egged.
So, a MAGA voter living the reality of promises made, promises kept. And after she spoke out against him, she's received death threats. Not much of a welcoming party when someone changes their mind based on reality. But here's another testimony.
This woman asked us not to show her face for fear of retribution. She recently retired from the Bureau of Fiscal Service because she was afraid of losing her health insurance if she was fired. She also voted for Trump.
Would you still have supported him?
I'm not sure that I would have. The way that it's been done, I'm for balancing the budget, that type of thing, but not in this context. It's just not right.
So the woman that's afraid to show her face still isn't completely sure that she wouldn't have voted for the guy that forced her to retire early out of fear of losing her health insurance. You know, she was all in for what Elon told her was balancing the budget, but not in the context of her life being turned upside down. USA Today talked to more people that have decided to leave MAGA, and their stories are both unsurprising and eye-opening at the same damn time.
The Leaving MAGA movement is taking hold for some people, and these are their voices. Stephanie Messina became a Christian nationalist in 2014, only a few years after she began her career as a pediatric respiratory therapist.
We were watching his addresses, and contrary to everything that I had been taught, being a trained respiratory therapist and working in one of the finest institutions in the country, I wasn't masking, and I was falling in line with all of these anti-science ideas.
Now, as a mom to 5 boys, Messina sees that a slippery slope led her into the Make America Great Again movement.
It isn't about Christianity, it's about control. MAGA is not about Jesus. I did 3 years of really hard work because I knew I needed to change. I knew that my wounds from my childhood, the Christian right, Christian by name only, by the way, Christian nationalism, I will say it all day long, is Christian in name only, in name only.
You know, it's reassuring to listening to these folks tell their stories about how they found their way out of the destructive and deadly political movement. But it's really hard to listen to these folks tell their stories of how they found their way out, because they fought people that told them calmly, excitedly, in fact-based terms, in life or death terms, but they were told in every way imaginable. But the oppositional thoughts became more motivation for them to dig their heels in.
Rich Logis considered himself a true MAGA supporter, but after the Republican response to the mass shooting at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, he decided enough was enough.
When I was in the MAGA community myself, we had a fantasy of killing the Republican Party and making it a MAGA party. And I think it is safe to say that that fantasy is now a reality, and that the GOP, whatever it was before 2015, no longer exists.
Since then, Logis set up a community for those who have left MAGA or those afraid to leave. He connected with Stephanie Messina after she posted about her departure on social media. They've been working together since.
MAGA is as addictive as nicotine. A lot of well-meaning people on the left will say it's so pathetic that MAGA people don't wake up until something terrible happens to them. And I'm like, but it's so very human. It's so very human to need a wake-up call.
I've learned a lot about how much bravery it takes for someone to acknowledge publicly that they made a mistake, that they were wrong, that they acknowledge those errors, and that they want to make amends for any statements, actions, or rhetoric that may have harmed others.
I've always been a firm believer in detaching from a conversation with someone that rejects plain reality, knowing that the only way that they'll ever be convinced is if the issues finally affect them personally, like what Stephania talked about there. But the Uvalde school shooting was one of those moments that I couldn't even try to convince anyone that supporting this party makes no sense. But Rich Logis was one of the people that was changed by it so much, he started Leaving MAGA, which talks with former MAGA folks and their stories of escaping the death cult that they were in. Again, it's maddening I guess, and refreshing at the same time.
When Donald Trump ran the first time, I liked the idea of having a president that was not a career politician. I dove headfirst into the Trump media bubble. Fox News and others had led me to believe that the Democrats were about to start doing Gestapo-style roundups. And then he got impeached for trying to extort political favors from Ukraine by withholding military aid. And then when he refused to concede his loss in 2020 and sent a violent mob to attack our Capitol on January 6th, that was the final straw for me.
When Donald Trump first ran for president, I was afraid ISIS was going to come to America and impose Sharia law. So I liked his tough line on immigration and that he opposed gay marriage and transgender rights. I entered the right-wing media bubble. I became a part of the MAGA movement, and I liked that he was anti-establishment. My eyes really started to open in 2024 when Trump ran his campaign on nonstop fear-mongering and hatred towards immigrants. I'm dating a woman from the Philippines, so I know how much damage that could do.
I was only 13 when I joined. Donald Trump had just won the 2016 election. I told myself to keep an open mind, but to me, a 13-year-old interpreted this as completely changing my center and center-left sources of info to becoming a member of a pure Trump echo chamber. Very quickly, I was all in for MAGA. I lost my moral compass, and I started to believe in things that I knew deep down were wrong. I thought that we should be sending our troops to the border and shoot all people on sight for trying to get in, even though both of my parents were Mexican immigrants.
These stories have some common characteristics because no matter the age, race, or gender of the former MAGA member, they all entered a heavy MAGA echo chamber or a media bubble that demonized the other, giving them a collective sense of superiority that disregarded people's lives and their experiences. This is obviously by design, because cults and deadly political movements always use a barrage of propaganda that leans on separating the group from everybody else that they deem harmful or scary. They push it so much, any attempt from others to speak the truth only forces them deeper into that belief system.
I became this nanny to this family. They were wonderful. And that was right before the Obama-McCain election. And I had never voted before. I was like 19 years old. And I remember them asking me, hey, who are you voting for? And I said, I don't know. I know nothing about politics. I don't care. And they said, well, do you want to learn? Because it's kind of important. And they sat me down and they sort of taught me everything they knew about politics. And they were very Republican. And I vividly remember them telling me that when you're young, you have a big heart, so you're liberal. And when you're older, you have a big brain, and so you're conservative. And I remember saying, well, can't I be both? And they said no. And ever since then, I had this like superiority complex because all of my friends, all of my peers were so excited about Obama. They were so excited to vote for him. They were excited when they won. And there was this like collective effervescence of victory. And I was not a part of that. And weirdly, that made me feel special. I felt different.
It focused in on the age-old division of some people being better than others that paid no attention to the reality of our history, our laws, our punishments, or our assumptions about those deemed inferior, which is even more curious when some Black or Latino MAGA members embrace the hatred that includes themselves. You know, this last man's story proves that even self-hatred is overlooked when our history of oppression has beaten some of us down.
First off, I was alone. I didn't feel welcomed wherever I went, whether it was in the community that I grew up or whether it was the communities that I was experiencing at the moment. And so I was always like on the edge, in the middle of different cultures and different experiences. When my family would bring up that all of the things that we as Black people have gone through, I just didn't want to fight. Like, I didn't want to live a life of fighting. I wanted to believe in something that could supersede all of that and that could just take that all away from me.
So this is you with a Confederate flag wristband.
I had already started making that rightward shift, and then Trump came on the scene. But at that moment, I ended up finding myself on Facebook groups and Twitter groups trying to defend people who were raising Confederate flags and talking about statues, because I really thought that if I took up these issues that they seem to care so much about, that they'd accept me too. That's what I was hoping. It did not turn out that way.